Hey, what's up, everybody? Yeah, I'm here to, as you can see right there, read off Dan Drazens' review of Sonic 244, which was published back in February of this year. In case a lot of you don't know, issue 44 was the second part in the subplot, if you will, the detour, as some people put it, of the current, if not recent, Mecha Sally World Tour 2 Death Egg Mark II story arc, and the subplot, or the sub-arc, if you will, was called Endangered Species. Just let me get a little comfortable here so I can read this. Alright. This, of course, like I said, now for some of you that don't know about Dan Drysen's reviews, I haven't done some, I think, in a while. Dan Drysen basically scores an issue by 10, and sometimes, if it's 2 issues, it's more than just that perfect score that he gives it. In other words, it's by category. In other words, a head category, a heart category, and an artistic category. If you get 10 in all 3 of them, you get a perfect score of 30. Now, if it's 2 stories in one issue, it's a perfect score of 60. That's if you get 10 out of 10 in both. But let's just say that this one, which is Endangered Species Part 2, was definitely one that I'm pretty sure Dan Drysen was looking forward to reviewing because of what occurred in it. And in case you don't know, well, you'll find out in a second. But this is what he says. First of all, he acknowledges who wrote the story, who did the artwork and stuff. And yeah, I'll provide a link down below. In it, soon enough, so you guys can check this out yourself. But anyway, this is what he says. Dan Drysen says, and I quote him, and he says, "Note, I came down with a mild case of whiplash, trying to follow the temporal shifts from the present to the past and back numerous times. So as a service to my readers, I'm going to cut up this ungainly Frankenstein's monster of a story and sew it back together in a way that makes chronological sense. You're welcome." And he continues on, and I quote, "Let's backtrack to where the previous story left off, with Metal Knuckles showing up to beat the snot out of Sonic. And he starts out doing a pretty good job of it until Amy tries giving him a few love taps with the old Pico hammer. Tails, meanwhile, is trying to cross the wires on the stun traps and manages to fry Metal Knuckles, Sonic himself, and Amy Rose. Better stick to making cute robot foxes, kid." In other words, Tails knocked himself and the others out. While that's happening, or somewhere around there, Ian's grasp of time seems to have seriously failed him, even in a reconstituted version of this narrative. Thrash and a couple of demon dogs come out of nowhere and land in Dr. Finn's office. The good mad doctor isn't in, but rather than make an appointment with the receptionist, he ransacks the office until he happens to find a warp ring's owner's manual. Okay, until he happens to find a warp ring owner's manual. How convenient. Sometime after pimping his ride, Thrash arrives and examines Tails' handiwork. On the plus side, he acts rather solicitously towards the unconscious good guys. On the minus side, his feelings for echidnas in general pretty much parallels those of a Klansman for President Obama. After making a show of solicitude for the incapacitated heroes, he then, and this is the biggest gaping hole in the narrative, somehow gets the echidna population to drink his version of Kool-Aid and hop through the warp ring into loose continuity limbo. While that's going on, Knuckles arrives but is distracted by the demon dogs and the general carnage, but not to the point that he fails to find our unconscious heroes. Remember them? Who come to and make with the exposition. After communicating with Nicole via T-Pop, acting as an iFox, well, he's closer to an android, really. They finally find Thrash, who then tells Knuckles, "Thanks for helping me commit genocide against your peeps." Knuckles tries to fight back, but is repelled by Thrash's vocal gimmick. Aren't we all? And just as Sonic gets into the act and has no better luck against Thrash, Metal Knuckles reboots thanks to another dubious plot device, Krazood. So yeah, you can pretty much tell that Dan Drazens didn't really look forward to having to review or even read this issue, but we move on. Again, remember what I said about this. He scores it by 10 in each category. So he starts off with the head score. And this is his thoughts on the head score, and I quote what he gives to the head score for the head category, and I quote, "I don't know which is worst. The possibility that Ian deliberately jazzed with this story's timeline in order to obstruct the genocide of the echidnas by Thrash, and thus minimizing whatever criticism he might catch for it, or whether the jazzing is part of an elaborate gotcha he plans to pull on the readers. Either way, it's pretty poor storytelling. The worst part of the story, of course, is how he obscured the disappearance of the echidnas. What kind of story did Thrash tell them to get them to jump through the hoop? How many echidnas are we talking about, anyway? This part of the story would have needed a lot more work and thought if it were being written for anything other than a comic book. But because it was written for a comic book, Ian can let loose continuity pull his chestnuts out of the fire, and I hate to say this, get away with the worst kind of hack writing to explain a critical plot point. To me, this explains why Ian has the timeline for the story go berserk with all the back and forthing. Even given the abysmally low standards for writing for comics, if Ian had tried a straight-ahead chronological version of the story, the gaping plot hole concerning Thrash and the echidnas would have been unmistakable. But by jazzing with the timeline, it's camouflaged because the reader is so confused by story's end that it lessens the impact of the event. And at that point, Ian slips into what the hell, let's have a fight mode, and Thrash gets in Okay, I and at that point, Ian slips into what the hell, let's have a fight mode, and Thrash gets to throw out his gimmick. Continuing on, Dan Drazens' head category, or thoughts of the head category by Dan Drazen on the story. And I quote, "There really isn't a whole lot more to the story. It may be necessary in terms of plot development, but even without the time gimmick, the fight scenes are old, and so is the character shtick. This could easily have been replaced by a previously page, and would have made just as much sense. Head score in the head category of the story. Head score for the story in the head category, 1. I category, which is the artistic category. Ordinarily, the artwork helps to sort of rescue a weak story. But in this case, the dismal weather, which is supposed to set up the atmosphere for the story, reinforces the overall downer vibe of this installment. I suppose that's what Stephen Butler was aiming for, in which case he succeeded. I score 9, artistic score 9. So far it's a 10 in the first story. But that's combining 9 and 1, so it's not so good right now. That's like an F. Can he salvage getting to a 15, which would be like a D? We'll find out. Because like I said, 30 is like an A, 25 is like a B, 20 is like a C, 15 is like a D. So let's see what we get. Heart score. This is his score for the heart category, and this is what he says about the heart category of the story. And I quote, "Between the apparent genocide of the echidnas and our heroes getting the short end of the shtick this time around, this is a serious downer of a story. The only thing that saves it is the same loose continuity that lets Ian get away with one of the biggest plot holes I've ever seen. Seriously, does anybody out there think the echidnas are really gone? I'm just cynical enough and experienced enough in reading this comic to know that if the vanished echidnas are needed, they can easily be pulled back into the story. We don't even know what Thrash planned to do with them in the first place. It's no accident that Ian's dialogue for Thrash is vague on this point. As for whether this is all tied in with the legal situation involving Ken Penders and the Archie comics, I don't even want to go there. The situation, from what I understand through a thread on the subject on Scott Shaw's Facebook page, is just about as hopelessly bystanced and what is that word? Byzantine is just about hopelessly Byzantine, and if Ian thought it could be exploited for the sake of the story, well, actually, I wouldn't put it past him. In case you want to look it up yourselves, look for Scott Shaw's name without the trademark exclamation point on the Facebook. Still, there are better stories to tell, and better stories than this one is shaping up to be. Replent is the word that comes to mind. Heart score 4. So far, the only story, which is the main story, gets a 14 out of 30. Essentially gets basically a D minus. Now, before anybody says anything, I know a lot of people don't really like what Dan says sometimes, and And I know a lot of you pretty much feel that Dan Dryzen treats this all ages comic like a novel, like an adult novel, a junior teenage novel, or something like that. But you know what? Dan Dryzen isn't the only person out there that reviews comics. I review comics. Linkara reviews comics. A lot of people review them, and sometimes they give them scores, and sometimes they do point out plot points and stuff like that. And sure, sometimes you may not agree with it, but you know what? If they can point something out, whether you feel it's necessary or not, then that's their right to do it. Just like it's your right, in opinion, to say, hey, I don't like the fact that they're reviewing it the way they are. It's just a all-ages comic. That's true, but the thing is, when people like Dan Dryzen, and Linkara, if you will, review comics the way they do, they're trying to get a point across. They're trying to get a point that's saying, hey, look, we know you guys are doing the best job you can, but you got to do better. And what he's saying right now with Endangered Species Part 2 is that it's not the best Ian could have done. It's basically like he's saying that Ian's time frame for this was not the best time frame, that he could have came up maybe with a different kind of vision, different kind of story to fit into the place of this until the whole situation was over with. I mean, quite honestly, I look at it like this. If I was Ian Flynn, and I'm not trying, and this is no knock on him, but if I was Ian Flynn, I would have said to myself, okay, I got the story that's going to involve Echidnas, but we got the situation going on behind the scenes. What do? I would have gone and asked for advice. And if someone would have said, yeah, you should do the story, then I would have done it. But if they would have said, oh, but by the way, if I was you, I would wait until the whole lawsuit thing was settled, then I would have came up with something different. Like maybe I would have put the crossover in the place of the story. I'm just saying, that's just my opinion, though. Anyway, again, Dan Dryzen, you can like what he says or not, but at least he has a right to his opinion. And if he has an opinion that allows him to review stuff like this the way he does, then, that's his right. There's not really much we can do about that. Well, history was made for Sonic Universe. What issue is this? 48, which was released in March. I'm not going to say much about this, but let's just say it's the first one I've seen that's got a perfect score of 30. All for One Part 3 deep cover, which was Sonic Universe issue 48. Not going to go much into it, but let's just say Dan Dryzen actually likes this. He really does. He gives the head portion of the story 10. He gives the eye portion, the artistic portion of the story a 10, and he gives the heart of the story a 10. So I'll provide a link with that as well, and you can read it yourself. But that's pretty impressive. That's for once, a Sonic issue, first time I've ever read in a while, got a perfect score from this guy. Kind of tells you that Ian Flynn, obviously, whether you agree with it or not, does a better job with, writing comics he starts on with when they first begin than trying to continue and work out a mess that's already been, or work out a mess or whatever you want to call it, or work on the already established continuity of a book that's had several writers before him. But, again, whether you like Dan Dryzen or not, he's got a right to his opinion. Again, I'll provide a link to both reviews down below so you can read them. And that's all I'm going to say. Comment below. And I will talk to you all later. God bless. Take care.